Okay, here we are, week 13 in our Bible reading program. So, this particular week, though, you will be looking at from Judges 11, the book of Judges completely, and then even the book of Ruth. So, be finishing the book of Judges, I think chapter 3 and onward, and then even the book of Ruth. So this morning we are going to be looking at one particular aspect of the book of Judges, and that is the story of Jephthah and Jephthah's vow and the dialect of death is what we're going to be looking at. It's kind of a like all of the book of Judges here, strange but true. And in this particular story with Jephthah, there's two things in it that are strange but true. You know, stranger than fiction in some ways. You've heard me talk about, from the missionary side of things, how that the importance of speaking a dialect of the people is so important. Completely different area we're going to look at here this morning, but that fact is going to resonate true here this morning in the second half of the message as we go through this. So we are heavy on maps here this morning. To understand this story here is it's going to be heavy on maps. But what I want you to understand here, that this map that you see here and the different highlights are the different judges you're going to be reading about. A couple things to notice in this. The darker green area is the area that was conquered by Joshua. And you may remember that there are two things that the Lord spoke through Joshua to the people, and he said, one of those things was, the things that Moses instructed you, follow those things, learn those things, live in those things, to be teaching them to your children, to be going over them yourselves, follow the instructions of Moses. And the other things he said was that the land largely was subdued, but yet there were pockets of people around, yet still, as the land was divided up to the 12 tribes of Israel, they were supposed to drive out and fully inhabit those areas. That was what was supposed to happen. Well, as long as Joshua was alive, and as long as the generation after him, who still remained there, was alive, they were faithful. But after that, things began to crumble. And what we see here in the book of Judges is the result of not doing those two things. Because we're going to see people that are going to be falling into the pagan practices of the people that were not driven out of the land. So this, again, goes back to this idea in the scriptures that when we don't do it God's way, there's a reason why God has laid it out in a certain way, even if it's hard for us to understand, because time will unfold and we will see why it is so important. As we read the book of Judges, we need to understand that period, which we read about, story after story, was not happening simultaneously. Actually, about 250 years, the book of Judges takes place. I want you to think about that. So, roughly speaking, the history of our country, the United States of America, is the time frame that the book of Judges took place. So lots of times for things to happen. So when these things were occurring of the different people and the different judges, it was with years in between. Because again, it was a situation of not following what God had said to do. The order there is mixed up within it. Some of them we know very little about. Shamgar, Jair, some of those where there's just a paragraph in the book. Some of them in greater detail, like the story today of Jephthah, Samson, those Gideon. They take up a little bit more of the details in that book. But what I want you to understand here this morning, that this is the result of disobedience. And God was faithful in that when his people cried out to him that he would send these people here that were judging the people who were oppressing God's people. That's why it's called judges. Really, they were rescuers in some ways, but the word that's used there is judges. So now this is what we're facing as we look at this. And then you're going to end the week with the book of Ruth, which by the way, the book of Ruth is occurring during this time. And ironically, from here, because Ruth was a Moabitess, and she goes back with her mother-in-law back into the land of Israel from the 12 tribes perspective there. So very interesting time, but a wonderful story of romance and a love story that is just a wonderful story of God's sovereignty amidst all of this chaos here of the book of Judges. So we're going to hone in specifically at Judges, and we'll be looking at Judges 11, and we'll start our reading there with Jephthah. All right, let's have a word of prayer, and we will get started. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to put ourselves into this story. This is one of many in the book of Judges in which we have to bend our minds around the condition of the context, the cultures that were involved, the decisions of the people that were involved. In many ways, we were difficult for us to put ourselves into them. Pray you'd help us do that this morning, and pray for clarity in my thoughts, but also clarity in the presentation here, Lord. As the Holy Spirit will teach us and move in us so that we will have greater understanding of this particular story in the book of Judges. Thank you that you've recorded it for us. It is certainly a microcosm of some of the things that we are facing in our society today. Decisions that are made that seem to be made with no forethought as to the consequences. And how that the microcosm of humanity is seen in each of these stories. And when we see the microcosm of humanity, we see poor decisions, we see bad results. Thank you, Lord, that what rings true is you are faithful to rescue your people when they called upon you. That's hope for us. In the circumstances of life, when we surrender to you, that's the best thing that we could do. Help us to understand that here today. In your name I ask these things. Amen. Okay, so this is the context of the book of Judges. Let's look specifically now at this story of Jephthah versus Ammon. Okay? I want you to read with me chapter 11, the book of Judges, starting at verse 1. Keep in mind here, I shrink the map a little bit so you can see what's going on here, but Ammon is on the border area of what was the conquered area of Israel. And down here was Moab, and this is Ammon right here. So, read with me verse 1, chapter 11. Now Jephthah was a Gileadite. He was a mighty man of valor, and he was the son of a harlot. And Gilead begat Jephthah. So, the area here, let me back up on the slide here so that you can get a better idea here. This area right here is known in the Bible as Gilead. There's two names because Gad, the son of Jacob, received an inheritance up in this area as well as Reuben. But just so you know, when you read about Gilead, it's talking about this area right here. You see it in its print right here, but that is the area of Gilead. Well, here this man named Jephthah was from that particular area. He was known as a man of reputation. He was a mighty man, but understand this. He was the product of a prostitute relationship. His father had. So he was an illegitimate son. And being an illegitimate son, he was not accepted into the family. That's what verse 2 tells us. It said, Gilead's wife bore sons. Apart now, Gilead's real wife, not the prostitute, his wife bore sons, and his wife's sons grew up. They drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall have no inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. In other words, you are not a legitimate product to enable you to have the inheritance. Verse 3, then Jephthah fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tov, or Tav. And worthless men banded together with Jephthah and went out raiding with him. So, he's driven out. We don't know where the land of Tav was. There's some guesses, but they are just truly guesses. We have no idea where he actually went to, somewhere in the vicinity, but we don't know exactly in an ancient map where that could be. Notice, though, what happened here. He went out and he fled his brothers. He dwelt in that land, and it says worthless men. So, what it means is people who are vain, who are empty. It means that they were probably outcasts, much like he was. So he bands together with them. And in the text here, the text I was reading, it says that they went out and raiding with him. That word raiding is added to the text. It's just assumed that because of who Jephthah was, that he was a mighty man of valor, these men joined up with him, that they were doing that type thing, much like David's mighty men as well. Because David was an outcast in his time before he became the legitimate king of Israel. So, that's the setting here of Jephthah regarding his history. And then what happens is the people of Ammon here are going to attack the people of Israel, okay, who are the settling in that particular region. And I won't go on and read that, but it starts in verse 4 and moves on through to verse 11. Basically, what happens is Ammon comes and attacks them, and then the people of Gilead say, we need help in this. We should call on Jephthah and his band of raiding marauders to help us. So they contact Jephthah, and they say to Jephthah, we would like for you to come help us. And Jephthah says, am I not the one that you drove out? You said, I have no inheritance here? They said, yes, but now we need you. Come help us. And if you come help us, we'll make you ruler of our people. So he's saying, hold on a minute here. If I come and help you, rescue you, you'll make me leader of the people? They said, yes, we will do that. He says, okay. So they go to Mizpah. And I want you to realize here, this will be just a side note, there's a Mizpah here, there's a Mizpah here. There's two towns called Mizpah on either side of the Jordan River. But the one we're referring to is on the eastern side. It was an area of gathering of people. He goes there. This is acknowledged. And he, before the Lord, proclaims that he will do this for the Lord and for his people. Okay? So that catches up a little bit here regarding the passage as we move along. So, Ammon then attacks. And let's look at chapter 11, verses 12 through 28. Jephthah then sends messengers to the king of Ammon. He says, what are you doing? What are you attacking us for? We find out in the context, Jephthah says, we've been living here for 300 years. Why are you attacking us now? Well, the king comes back and says, because you stole our land from us. That's why we're attacking you. Okay? So, Jephthah there knows his history. And remember, he's an illegitimate child, but he is a son of Gilead, so he knows his history, and he begins to correct the history. He says, no, that's not the case at all. He says, 300 years ago, my ancestors came up and they left Egypt. They left Egypt. They crossed the Sinai Peninsula. They went up to the edge of the southern end of the Dead Sea, and they said to Edom, would like to pass through. The Edomites said no, so they went around the Edomites, all the way around, and went back. That would be on this map here. Edom would be down here. They went all the way around, and they went back up and to the area there, and then it was there that they were attacked near the land of Moab by the people who were living in that area here. Let's pick up the text here. Verse 15. And he said, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the people of Ammon. For when Israel came up from Egypt, they walked through the wilderness as far as the Red Sea, came to Kadesh, and they went to Edom, like I said. Jump down to verse 18. They went along through the wilderness and bypassed the land of Edom and to the land of Moab, came to the east side of the land of Moab. They encamped on the other side of the Arnon River, which is right down here. There's two rivers here, the Yabok and the Arnon. He said they camped along the side of the Arnon River, and then Israel sent message to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, please let us pass through our land into our place. Same request, we just want to pass through it. He says he wouldn't let us pass through. Matter of fact, he attacked us. He attacked my ancestors, and my ancestors defeated them. So he says, you want to complain about not having that land? Well, it's our God, Yahweh, who defeated Chemosh, your God. So if you want to complain about why you don't have your land, go to your God, because our God gave us that land by defeating your ancestors. That's what he says. Well, as it turns out, the people of Ammon don't listen, and they continue their plans to attack. So, fast forward here of what happens in the later part of this story here. Jump to verse 30. Now I started 29. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced toward the people of Ammon. Well, we know what happened here. He defeats them, because he is one of the judges of Israel. He defeats them, but here's one of the bizarre stories that happens in the midst of this. And we'll pick it up here in verse 30. It says, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Okay? So, Jephthah advanced against the people of Ammon, fought against them, and he won. He defeated them. Verse 34, we go in where Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah. Remember Mizpah right here. He returns from the battling with these people, returns to his house, and lo and behold, who comes out of his house? His own daughter. With a tambourine, she's celebrating his victory. Okay, remember what his vow was. His vow was, whatever comes out of my house, I will give to you as a burnt offering. Problem here, right? Significant problem here. Verse 34, when Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. It's complicated now, even more so. And it came to pass when he saw her, he tore his clothes. And he said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. For you are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. And what was his word? Whatever comes out of my house, I'm going to offer as a burnt offering. Okay, significant problem here. And the problem we're faced with when we read this is Jephthah here going to follow through with this vow he made that if he comes back victorious, he is going to offer up a burnt offering? And here, who comes out? His daughter. All right, the people that he's representing here, the people of Israel, is child sacrifice acceptable? Absolutely not. It's one of the reasons why God wanted them to drive out all the inhabitants of that land. So there's a dilemma. What is he going to do? And there's actually a dilemma within the text. This is the vow of Jephthah that we've got to ask ourselves this question. Jephthah's vow. His vow was to offer a burnt offering with whatever he came out of his house after he returns in victory. All right, we have to ask ourselves here. Did he sacrifice his daughter? Okay, we're going to take just a few minutes here to walk through this and the rest of the text as it is written. I have to tell you, for many years, I thought, based upon what the text tells me, he did. How could he do that? That he did sacrifice his daughter. But I don't believe that as I'm standing before you here this morning. And here's why. Okay? The vow. Did he sacrifice his daughter according to the vow he said? I'm going to say, no, he did not. And here's why. Okay? The first point in this is this. Hebrew culture placed an extreme importance in the value of life. Okay? We already know that human sacrifice is condemned. That's why God wanted to go in there and said he's going to conquer all this land, because one of the things that they did outside of worshiping other gods was they did child sacrifice. So we know that's already against what God's principles are. On top of that is the Hebrew mindset of the life is first and foremost in all things. The Hebrews understood that God is the giver of life, and the preservation of God's gift is of very high priority. Now, we're in a time of apostasy, all kind of things going on. We have no idea the influences of Jephthah when he was driven away, when he went to this land of Tob. We really don't know all that was involved in this. All we have is the text to go off of. But understanding the Hebrews and their belief in the importance of life, we have to ask ourselves, well, did he really follow through with this? This is why Rahab, the story of Rahab the harlot, when she hid the spies and she lied about them being with her. That's why it was okay. She's never condemned for that lie, because her lie, she was protecting the lives of God's people, those spies who were living with her. Okay? All right, so that's point number one as to why I don't think Jephthah followed through with his vow as far as a burnt offering. All right, point number two. All right, notice in verse 37. Let's pick up the text and read down through here. He acknowledges that, what you've done here is, I can't believe you've done this. Verse 36, it says, so she said to him, my father, if you have given your word to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you and your enemies and the people of Ammon. She understood the significance of a vow. When a vow was made before the Lord, again, the Hebrew people were bound to fulfill that vow. It wasn't a matter of, okay, I messed up on that, I'm not going to fulfill a vow. No, the vow had to be fulfilled. She understood that. But notice what she says in verse 37. Then she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander in the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. Okay, what is she asking to do? To go away for 2 months to mourn what? Her virginity. She's not going away to mourn the fact that she's going to be offered as a burnt sacrifice. She's going to mourn the fact that she's never going to marry and never going to have children. That's what she goes to mourn. That's what the text says. Okay? So if we're going to follow this line of thinking, this is significant. What was important for a Hebrew young woman? What was life to them? It was to get married and have children. So this was going to be of great sacrifice. It was going to be something that she's going to mourn because she is the only child of Jephthah. And she is going to mourn the fact that she's never going to be given in marriage. She's never going to have children. Was this going to be a sacrifice for Jephthah? Absolutely it was, because he only had one child, and it was a woman. And it appears here, reading between the lines, that they are acknowledging the fact that now Jephthah is going to have no offspring to carry on his name. Okay? So, virginity is mourned, not her death. And that is reiterated here in verse 39. This vow, the fulfillment of the vow, states this again. Read with me verse 38. And so he said, Jephthah said, go. And he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. Verse 39. And so it was at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow, which he had vowed. And what does it say? She died. No. It says she knew no man. And it became a custom in Israel, so that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite. Okay? What was the fulfillment of the vow? She did not know a man. Why? Why would this be the case when he said he was going to do a burnt sacrifice? Well, it goes back to the importance of life. It goes back to the fact that a child sacrifice was absolutely abhorred by God. And he could not do that. If he was going to call himself a follower of Yahweh, a conqueror for Yahweh, even though he made this flippant vow, there's no way that that would supersede the importance of life. So even in this, it seems to indicate that the carrying out of the vow involved her becoming a servant of the Lord, and the assumption being maybe even in the tabernacle, where she was given for tabernacle service for the rest of her life as a servant of the tabernacle, and she never, ever, ever got married. And that would supersede the fulfillment of the vow. Okay, if that's not enough, and perhaps the strongest point regarding this is that Jephthah has a legacy in Hebrews chapter 11. Okay? The Hall of Fame of Faith, we call that, right? Jephthah is mentioned along with Gideon and Barak and Deborah. And we have to ask ourselves, if Jephthah truly did sacrifice his daughter as a burnt sacrifice, would he have been put in that classification of Old Testament saints? I'm going to say it seems unlikely that that would be the case. So Jephthah still fulfilled his vow, but not as the literal burnt sacrifice aspect of that. Okay, at least that would be my understanding today as I'm talking with you about this. I do not think he sacrificed his daughter literally. He sacrificed his daughter spiritually. That she would not become a mother of Israel and bear children to that end. Okay. Someone could say, I don't know that I agree with that, Jeff. It still seems like, well, maybe so. But I'm just telling you that as I see this, based upon the wording here, the emphasis seems to be her virginity, not her death. Okay? All right, but the story doesn't end there with our man named Jephthah. Okay? Because there's another lesson for us to learn here. And I have entitled this the Ephraimitic Madness. Okay? The Ephraimitic Madness. I have here on that map, focusing in on here, this area right here is roughly the area that was granted to Ephraim. Of the tribes of Jacob, you had Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh had an area over here and an area over here. These were Joseph's two sons, and Ephraim was here. Okay? What occurs here after this great victory is the Ephraimites now. The Ephraimites contact Jephthah and they say, "How dare you? How dare you go and do battle with Ammon and you don't invite us to be a part of that?" Now this is ironic because you see here, it's not on this map, it's up here, but in the time of Gideon they did the exact same thing. They went to Gideon and said, "Why did you not call upon us to help?" Well, Gideon said, "Oh, you had your own battles and you did great things, and I just did things with a little band of 300 people." So it was a way in which Gideon kind of squelched their angst, and they were satisfied with that. But here they go again. So Jephthah has this battle, defeats the Ammonites. The Ephraimites come and they say, "Why did you not do this?" He says, "I invited you to do it, but you didn't come." That's not included in the narrative as we read it, but it does appear that Jephthah did do that. Well, they do not listen to what he says. And they decide, "We're going to burn your house down with you in it." Okay? The book of Judges is bizarre. I mean, there's no other way to get around this. The stories, the interwoven, the layers of the depravity we see in the book of Judges is just amazing to me. Anyway, so what they do is they say, "We are going to come and burn your house down. How dare you do this without us?" Well, Jephthah's a mighty warrior. Jephthah's already had great victories here, and Jephthah doesn't allow that to happen. Okay? And Jephthah's army then does not permit this to happen. So, they come and they want to attack. They want to burn down his house. We've already been told that Jephthah's house is in Mizpah. And Jephthah whips up on them. They come to attack him. He says, "No way that's going to happen." He defeats them. All right, so what happens is the stragglers from this battle, from the people of Ephraim, run away. And we're told at this place called Zaphon. Okay, Zaphon is where many of them got caught. They got caught up with. Let's pick up the text here. All right? So chapter 12 is where all of this plays out. And really what we have here is a civil war. We have God's people fighting with God's people, killing each other. Imagine how God must feel about this at this point in the juncture. With all this happening in this 250 years of chaos in the book of Judges, most of it is God is providing a judge for the people of Israel from their oppressors. Now you have God's people fighting with God's people. Talk about a new level of low here as to what is happening. All right. So Civil War II. That was their intention. Jump to verse 4 of chapter 12. It says, "Now Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. And the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim, because they said, 'You Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim, among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites.'" Okay? They're calling them fugitives because they settled on the other side of Jordan. Their land was here, Manasseh is over here, Manasseh's up there. They're saying, "Oh, you are fugitives anyway. So we just want to take care of you because of who you are." Well, that didn't sit well with the Gileadites, of course. Verse 5, and it says, "The Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived. And when any Ephraimite escaped, they asked him a question. When the Ephraimite would say, 'Let me cross over,' the men of Gilead would say to him, 'Are you an Ephraimite?' They would say, 'Are you an Ephraimite?' So here we go. This is happening right here. The areas of the Jordan would go dry at different times of the year, so they were able to cross over on the shallow parts. in the dry parts. And they would, the people of the Gileadites here would ask them and say, you came to attack us, are you from Ephraim? If they would say no, they would give them a test. Okay? And the test was this. Judges chapter 12, verses 1 through 7. It's all occurring right here. And when they would try to cross, they would say, are you from Ephraim? And they would say yes or no. If they would say yes, they would be killed because they came to attack. If they said no, they would give them a test. And what they would say here is, say the word shibboleth. So remember now, 300 years have passed since the initial conquest entered into Canaan. What happens in languages over time is they begin to morph and change in dialects. So the people of Ephraim, this word here has a meaning. It has one of two meanings. It's kind of irrelevant, though one does have to do with water here with this word. And they said, say the word shibboleth. Well, the people from Ephraim over here could not say that SH sound because the dialectical change had occurred. So if they would say, okay, Sibboleth, then they knew, you're a liar. You are a liar. And they would kill him. Okay, so the difference here, the dialectical difference, and in this case it was a dialect of death, was sh versus s. Do that. Sh, s, sh, s. In my study, the training I had to do the type missionary work I did, we studied how the mouth forms these sounds. And when you're making that SH sound from an S, your mouth changes. Your lips change, your tongue changes to allow the air to go beside your tongue. And when it gets closer to the roof of your mouth, that enables us to say shibboleth versus sibboleth. It would be very similar in our language with the word same and shame. Okay? If you said, oh, yeah, I bought a new car and it was the same car as yours. You'd be like, what? It's the same car. That's what I said, the same car. You see the difference in that? Or if I said, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself. You say, no, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's what I said. Ashamed of myself. See, outside speakers don't pick up the sound distinctions because of the dialectical difference. Anyway, that dialectical difference played great significance in this story right here. Because when they said Sibboleth instead of Shibboleth, they knew they were from Ephraim, and they killed them because a civil war was happening at that particular point. All right. That was the dialect of death at that point. So we've covered the vow. The flippant vow that he made. But we also see that this situation, the other situation with Jephthah here was the Ephraimites and how they were involved in this as well. Okay, need to wrap this up. But let's make some application here. What can we take from this story of Jephthah? Well, the first one is this. Nobodies can become somebodies. Okay, here was a man who was an outcast, son of a prostitute, and we like these type stories because Jephthah was an underdog. He was somebody who was not most likely to succeed. He was somebody who was kicked out of his family. He had to go fend for himself. He rallied people around him and made something of himself, so much so they had a warrior reputation that the people who kicked him out actually sought for him and his services. Interestingly enough, to be used in the purposes of the Lord. So we can take encouragement in the fact that nobodies can become somebodies. when they surrender to the Lord's purpose. That is exemplified, and one of the things we could take away from Jephthah, or Jephthah's life here. Okay? All right. Another point here that's worth mentioning regarding this. Vows to God. Oops, let me back up here. Vows to God are serious commitments. They're not bargaining chips. Anytime we would say, Lord, if you do something, I will do this, that's a bargaining chip. We're trying to bargain God as if he was some weenie little God that we can manipulate to get to do what we want him to do. That's not the case. A vow should be something serious. If I vow to stop doing something, or I vow to do something, it needs to be because of who God is, not what I want. If Jephthah here, I keep saying Jephthah, if Jephthah wanted to make an offering to God, he should have done that first. And then say, when I come back in victory, I'll make another one. But it wasn't this conditional bargain chip that oftentimes people of this era have done. And in the Old Testament, it wasn't an uncommon thing to do. Lord, if you do this, I'll do this. Same thing is done today. And when do we make these vows? In desperate situations. It's in situations that our backs are against the wall, and God, if you'll get me out of this, I will do this. I got caught in a crime. Lord, if you'll get me out of this, I will serve you. There was a point in one of my furloughs from Papua New Guinea where I got involved in a prison ministry with juvenile delinquents up in northwest Indiana. And we would go and we would preach a sermon every morning, and a Sunday morning at this juvenile detention center. And almost every Sunday, a young teen would come up and they would want us to pray with them, pray with us. My court case is coming up, and would you pray for me that God will help me to get out of here, and that I'm going to commit to serving Him. That was a common thing, but it was a bargaining chip. Lord, you get me out of here. You allow that judge to be favorable upon me, and I'm going to change my ways when I get out of here. That put me in here. Okay, this is a common thing that we do. Vows to God are not supposed to be that way. We come to God as to who He is, not what we want from Him in the circumstance in which we live. Okay? So nobody's can become somebody's, but vows to God are serious commitments, not bargaining chips. Jephthah said a vow rather flippantly. And it turns out his daughter comes out of that. And it ended up being hardship because he was bound to fulfill that vow, but it was hardship even though I don't think he offered her a sacrifice. There was great sacrifice that occurred because of that. All right, last point. Last point, this pertains to the Ephraimites. Okay? Reactive pride is stupidity in action. And that's really what this was. The Ephraimites were like, man, why didn't you allow us some of this glory that you're getting? Why didn't you allow us? Man, we all want to be a part of an army that defeats an enemy. Why didn't you call on us? Why couldn't we be a part of that? Well, their reactive pride led them into attacking Mizpah and trying to burn down his home. When reactive pride occurs, it generally is stupidity in action. And the thing is to avoid this in the first place. First off, if it's a reaction, we ought to be pausing. Take a breath. In the midst of a circumstance, if it's a reaction, pause. Take a breath. Think about it first. And then if it's rooted in this, well then that's bad news. What's going to result from that is never going to be good. And it certainly wasn't for them. So we find out in the text, the Ephraimites, 42,000 of them were killed because of prideful action because of knee-jerk reaction based upon their pride. 42,000 of them, God's people killing God's people, occurred. That is a shame. And that's what happens, though, when we do things of this nature. Okay, I'm going to close here in prayer. I just want us to be contemplating this. As you read through the book of Judges, there are going to be all kinds of these type scenarios. And what they exhibit is what the book of Judges starts with and ends with. A bunch of people that are going about their lives, making the decisions on their actions based upon their own thinking. Not what God wanted them to do. And what does it say? They were doing what was right in their own eyes. And when we start functioning that way, when we do what is right in our own eyes without some moral standard, without some rudder to guide us and navigate us through the issues of life, this is where it's going to end up, in chaos. And what I thought about over and over again as I was reading through the book of Judges was, man, the attitude that's oozing from these decisions is what we're facing in our society right now. Senseless, stupidity, not thinking ramifications of decisions, trying to appease certain segments, facets of our society, regardless of what God said. Remember, the book of Judges was conquer the land, don't do what they did, follow what God said. Very simple. They couldn't do it. And for 250 years, there was chaos in the country. It's not till Samuel comes around that they begin to unify together again for a common purpose. That'll be forthcoming in the reading ahead. So, keep that in mind as you read through the book of Judges, and then cap that off with the wonderful story of Ruth this coming week. Okay, let's have a word of prayer.